Why do I think that curiosity is a superpower? And again, this is one of these things where I probably refer to a few things as a superpower, and it's just because I'm such um, a superhero fan. Well, particularly Marvel. Love the Marvel universe. Love the DC universe as well. It's a bit dark for my liking, but I quite like the vibe of the Marvel universe. So, um, why is curiosity a superpower? And I think for me, it's because it's not necessarily something that comes all that naturally for me, just because of the way my brain is wired. And I am curious about a lot of things. So if you speak to people that know me well, they will tell you that will go down rabbit holes of weird things sometimes. Like, I wonder what the origin of that word is. I wonder what Auld Lang Syne means. These kind of day-to-day things that we probably, we use in language and we don't necessarily understand them. What does a Mexican standoff actually mean? Like, oh, it's a term that we really shouldn't use. That's what it means. Little things like that. I'm sort of fascinated by those kinds of things. But an area that I've realised in my adult life that I'm not quite so good about is sort of curiosity when it comes to people, and I have a tendency to kind of take people as they are, which is a good thing in some ways, but also it's a bad thing in other ways. In that, I think it's the reason why, because of my wiring, I now realise that I just don't. It's not like I'm not interested. It's just that it doesn't occur to me to ask. So it's kind of a big thing that I've always tried to work on. Particularly where I was in my last role, where I was essentially a line manager for people, and to develop closer relationships with people, you really need to have that degree of curiosity. When they're asking, people ask how you are, don't they? Standard British greeting, and probably in other parts of the world as well. Um, and I've noticed that particularly now, I tend to be a bit more, yeah, I'm fine, thanks. And then that's the end of the conversation. But actually, I need to be a bit more like, genuinely interested in how they are rather than just being, yourself, the standard response. And also just things like, inquiring about their family, what do they like doing. So I found that quite hard when I was line manager. And again, it's not not because I'm not interested. It's just because it just doesn't come that naturally to me. Um, and curiosity is an interesting one, and it came up in another way in my sort of adult professional career, and it was about how you manage things like feelings of imposter syndrome, and also managing like stressful situations as well, managing the unknown. And I remember devising a little mental model for myself, and I have no idea whether this is something that I devised. It's probably a derivative of something that already existed, because there's very little in the way of original thought out there, as you will be aware. So I apologise if I'm nicking someone else's model. But I did a leadership development program a few years ago now. It was just before the pandemic kicked off, and it was all online anyway, which was fortunate. So I was able to continue doing it during the pandemic, and it was really, really good. It was like an emerging leadership thing, and it basically involved attending some sessions with speakers from different industries, and there was the people that the delegates on the program were all from different industries: NHS, government, private sector. It was really, really interesting. And one of the big things I learned from that was actually how prevalent those feelings of imposterism, if that is a word, are, which was quite reassuring. But you remember talking about these of uncertain situations, or situations maybe where you feel a bit stressed or a bit irritated, um you know really, rather than reacting to how you're feeling about it, there is a different way to approach it. So the little model I came up with, which I found quite helpful and still use now, which I've written sort of blog pieces about before, so you can certainly see what I've written about this in the past if you go back. But the model is essentially stay calm, be curious, and ask questions. So I guess you could argue that being curious and asking questions are essentially the same thing. But again, just because of the way my brain is wired, I think it's helpful for me just to go, being curious. One thing being curious, which I am in some regards, but then I need to be curious by asking questions about things. So staying calm is the critical step. And it goes back to that Viktor Frankl thing again, doesn't it? Of the gap between the stimulus and the response. So whatever it might be, and for me, it was often things like people presenting me with a problem that they wanted me to help them solve. Perhaps when I was already in the middle of dealing with multiple other things, or perhaps my bandwidth was getting pretty stretched by what was going on, and sometimes I would react in that situation rather than responding. Um, and the people that know me well will tell you that I'm quite a laid back person. I don't get stressed very easily, take things in my stride normally, but occasionally I would get stressed, I would react, I would get a bit irritated and a bit snippy. So this model was quite a helpful thing. So staying calm is kind of that critical step, and you do whatever you need to allow you to do that. You surf that wave of irritation. Take a big deep breath, take a couple of big deep breaths, just to allow that wave of irritation to pass and reduce that risk of the reaction, maximize the chance that you're going to respond rather than react. So stay calm, critical step number one. If you don't do that, then your ship is already sunk. Then you need to be curious. You need to be thinking, right, well, why, what is this problem? Why has this problem come up? And start asking questions about it. And you will find that the more you do that, the more you will either figure out whether this is actually something very important. You'll find out what it is and what you need to do about it. So that's so of course the dog wants to come and have a big drink in the middle of recording a video. Well, if you're thirsty, you're thirsty, I guess. You finishing anytime soon? Okay, we'll just continue. Hopefully there's not too much background sound. So yeah, I found that really helpful. And I'm not saying I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I still get a bit irritated when my bandwidth is stretched, but I am generally, I still try and be that, so noisy. I will still try and be that kind of relaxed, laid back person, but someone who's kind of capable of taking things seriously when they need to. And now he's cruising the floor looking for random rubbish that might have been dropped. Yeah, so that would be my thing. Just have a little pause, have a think about how you are from that point of view. Are there situations that you find difficult that could be helped by that approach? Is there situations where you tend to react rather than respond? And could a model like this be helpful for you? So I think it doesn't really matter in what steps you use to respond to that. You're such a pain in the bum. Um, but that critical step number one is finding a way to stay calm, reduce that gap between the stimulus and the response to allow those feelings of irritation to subside, and then allow you to actually begin the problem solving portion of it. So stay calm, critical step number one. Then you need to be curious, and you need to start asking questions. And that's a kind of problem-based thing. But I think it's also, for those of you who are wired like me, where you're maybe not naturally the most curious person when it comes to other people, how can you kind of foster that in yourself? So you can use that model as well. Maybe it's less of an issue staying calm, but just be curious. Be curious about the people that you interact with on a daily basis. How well do you know them? How can you get to know them better? Make that effort, especially if you're someone who's not the most curious about the people around you, as well intentioned as you might be otherwise. Okay, I hope you found that helpful. Let me know what you think, and I will catch up with you soon.